Throughout its long history, China has undergone many rebellions and revolutions. But the An Lushan Rebellion, which took place between 755 CE and 763 CE, remains one of the most devastating. So this episode, we're going to take a look at the factors that precipitated the revolt, the key events during the upheaval, and the ultimate resolution of the conflict. As we've already seen, the Tang dynasty is usually seen as a golden age in Chinese history. It's a time of flourishing culture, economic prosperity, and territorial expansion. But it wasn't all good. There were internal conflicts, and by the mid-8th century, the Tang Empire was faced with serious challenges. Wu Zetian's reign had left a not entirely positive legacy. After her abdication and death in 705, her son became the emperor. Zhongzong had previously been emperor, briefly, before his mother forced him out due to the ambitions of his wife. Now he was emperor once more. Again, briefly. He was overthrown in 710 and forced to abdicate, again, in favour of his son, Wu Zetian's grandson, if you're keeping score, who became the emperor Ruzong. Ruzong lasted for 2 years before he was forced to abdicate in favour of his brother, who became the emperor Xuanzong. It was not, as you can see, the most stable of times. Wu Zetian had relied on eunuchs for administration, and her efforts to centralise authority diminished the influence of the aristocracy, and this was a trend that Xuanzong continued, ultimately leading to increased political instability as eunuchs gained greater power. Traditionally, the Chinese bureaucracy was dominated by aristocratic families and scholar officials, whose influence was considered essential for effective governance. However, as Xuanzong increasingly turned to eunuchs for administrative support, this marginalised the traditional elite. The growing power of eunuchs alienated many aristocrats who felt threatened by their rising influence and feared losing their political relevance. This tension contributed to a fractured political landscape within the court. Corruption and abuse of power were also significant concerns associated with eunuchs during this period. Many eunuchs, driven by self-interest, engaged in corrupt practices, using their proximity to the emperor to manipulate decisions and amass wealth. This perception of corruption not only fueled distrust among the nobility, but also led to public outrage. The widespread belief that eunuchs were exploiting their positions for personal gain further exacerbated the resentment against them, painting a picture of a court riddled with self-serving individuals rather than devoted servants of the state. Moreover, the involvement of eunuchs in palace intrigues and factionalism destabilized the already delicate balance of power within the Tang court. As they vied for influence, eunuchs often engaged in political machinations that created rivalries and conflicts among various factions. This internal strife made governance increasingly difficult, undermining the emperor's authority and contributing to the decline of centralized power. The political landscape became a battleground where eunuchs wielded considerable influence, further alienating traditional power holders and increasing the overall instability of the regime. The issue of military control also played a crucial role in the contentious nature of Xuanzong's reliance on eunuchs. Traditionally, military leadership was reserved for aristocrats and experienced generals, who were expected to safeguard the empire. However, as eunuchs gained control over military forces, this encroachment alarmed many within the court and society. The potential for eunuchs to wield military power raised fears of coups and insurrections, as the military's loyalty became uncertain. This shift in military control not only threatened the established order, but also highlighted the vulnerabilities within the imperial structure. Lastly, the cultural stigma associated with eunuchs added another layer of complexity to Xuanzong's reliance on them. In a society that placed great emphasis on masculinity and traditional roles, eunuchs were often viewed with disdain. Their status as castrated men rendered them less honourable in the eyes of many, which fueled public aversion to their political power. This societal stigma contributed to the perception that eunuchs were unfit to hold significant authority, further intensifying the contentions surrounding their influence in the court. So by the middle of the 8th century, a pervasive sense of corruption and instability plagues the Tang court. Enter An Lushan. Now, as I think we've already established, China is a big place to rule and control, particularly when it might take weeks to get a message from the frontier to the capital. In fact, at this point in time, the Chinese Empire was slightly bigger by area than the Roman Empire had been when Diocletian divided it into two back in the 3rd century and appointed himself co-emperor with Maximian, each ruling half. Now, this wasn't an option for the Son of Heaven, so the emperor relied heavily on a network of military governors called jie de shi to maintain control over the frontier regions. However, as the Chinese saying has it, the mountains are high and the emperor is far away, and the jie de shi ruled as they saw fit, mostly within limits imposed by the court that were increasingly being tested. One of these governors was An Lushan, a general of Turkic origin who commanded a substantial force and had authority over the northeastern provinces. An Lushan was born around 703 CE to a Sogdian father and a Turkic mother. His mixed heritage exemplified the cosmopolitan nature of the Tang dynasty, where diverse cultures mingled. A few brief words about the Sogdians and why that might matter. The Sogdians were an ancient Iranian people from Central Asia, primarily inhabiting the region known as Sogdiana, which included parts of present-day Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. The Sogdians were known for their ability to facilitate trade and cultural exchanges between Chinese, Persian, and Indian civilizations. Their merchants travelled extensively, spreading goods, ideas, and cultural practices. The Sogdians practiced various religions, including Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, and Manichaeism. This religious pluralism contributed to their adaptability and integration into different cultures. During the Tang dynasty, Sogdians held significant positions, especially in trade and diplomacy. An Lushan exemplified this influence. Initially a soldier of modest means, An's prowess in military quickly propelled him up through the ranks, earning him significant power as a general. By the 740s, he commanded a powerful Yan army and controlled large areas, including parts of modern-day Hebei and Shandong provinces. His military acumen and rapidly expanding influence solidified his reputation as one of the Tang dynasty's most formidable generals. His military capabilities, however, were not matched by his loyalty to the Tang court. An's ascent within the court brought him into contact with influential figures, particularly Emperor Xuanzong. An's rapport with Xuanzong was strong, and he was viewed as a loyal servant who could command substantial military resources. The relationship was so close that Xuanzong's concubine actually adopted An Lushan. And it wasn't just the emperor he was close to. He was also a favourite of the chancellor Li Linfu. And you could say it was Li Linfu's death that was the start of the rebellion. An most definitely did not get on well with Li's replacement, and without Li's support, An's relationship with the other generals began to deteriorate too. It seems that An was a rather arrogant man, and while he'd effectively cultivated his relationship with the emperor and his consort, he'd been rather less successful with his peers and with the crown prince, and An began to worry about what would happen when Xuanzong died. In addition, his remarkable military accomplishments garnered admiration, but this same notoriety bred jealousy and suspicion among other court officials and amongst other generals. The Tang dynasty's political landscape was already riven with factionalism, officials often aligning themselves with various clans, creating a toxic environment where ambition could quickly devolve into animosity. An Lushan found himself enmeshed in this intricate web of political rivalry. So despite his formidable position, An Lushan's relationships with his contemporaries were tense, and the rivalry reached a crescendo when he was made a jie de shi. This designation granted him unprecedented autonomy over military forces, therefore establishing a fiefdom that could be leveraged against the central power of the Tang dynasty itself. An's growing power caused court officials to see him as a potential threat to the emperor's authority. Discontent among the military and local leaders generally was growing, primarily due to increased taxation and the central government's failure to effectively manage the vast territories of the empire. As the central government became increasingly reliant on regional military governors to deal with internal rebellions and defend against foreign incursions, these generals amassed substantial personal power. The more power they had, the more fearful and resentful the central authorities became. An Lushan's authority and military capabilities made him a formidable rival to the emperor, but that wasn't unique to him. Other zhe de shi enjoyed autonomy from the central government and commanded similar personal armies. Where An Lushan had an advantage was in his mixed heritage, which connected him to various ethnic groups outside of Han-dominated society. This not only brought him allies from sources not accessible to the establishment, but also complicated matters for some of the soldiers ordered to fight against him. So things kick off in 755 CE when An Lushan declares himself emperor in a bold move against the ruling Tang, claiming he was going to restore the Han dynasty's glory. The initial phase of the rebellion saw An's forces meet with remarkable success. Cities quickly fell, and many generals, equally unhappy about their treatment at court, defected to his cause, despite any animosity they may have held to him personally. His forces marched south and captured significant territories, including the capital Chang'an, present-day Xi'an, in 756. This is a pivotal moment during the early days of the rebellion. The Tang military leader at the time, Li Guangbi, failed to defend the capital, and as panic spread through the court, Emperor Xuanzong fled Chang'an, abandoning its defences and plunging the empire into chaos. The capture of Chang'an led to widespread atrocities, including looting and slaughter, as An Lushan's army enacted brutal retribution against perceived enemies. An's ambitions were not solely about challenging the Tang dynasty. He expressed intentions to reform the Tang administration, addressing corruption and inefficiencies that had plagued the dynasty, his agenda including redistributing land and wealth to win the support of local populations. We can't be 100% certain, it's not like he published a manifesto or anything, but given his mixed heritage, An might also have sought to create a more inclusive regime that incorporated various ethnic groups within his rule, potentially aiming to diminish the Han-centric policies of the Tang dynasty. Not forgetting, of course, the usual personal desires for power and recognition. He was trying to establish his own dynasty, which would legitimize his rule and elevate his status in Chinese history. But having gained it, he quickly became paranoid about losing power, a fear that turned out to be somewhat justified. After assuming the role of emperor, despite all his good intentions for governance, An essentially retreated to his palace and was rarely seen, relying on his assistants to administer the empire. An, always on the large side, became excessively obese. It was said that his weight once crushed a horse, although that seems unlikely, and he suffered from ulcers and a degenerative eyesight condition that eventually left him blind and reliant on his trusted eunuch, Li Zu'er. None of this did anything to improve his mood, and he would often execute servants for real or imagined slights or failings. His paranoia about losing power was compounded by rival factions within his own ranks, and in a nicely Shakespearean touch, his eventual assassination was orchestrated by his own son, An Qingxu. An Qingxu was angry at An Lushan's intention to make An Qing'en, his other son, the crown prince. An Qingxu worried about what would happen to him, fearing that An Lushan was planning to kill him, so he decided to strike first. He just needed someone with access to the emperor, someone the emperor trusted. He needed Li Zu'er. Li was an interesting character. An Lushan himself had neutered him when Li was a teenager, doing it so badly that Li nearly died. After this, An took him as his personal assistant, coming to trust and rely on him. It supposedly took 3 people to dress An by this stage, and one of Li's jobs was apparently to hold An's belly up with his head while he, Li, tied An's belt. In return for this and other services, An rewarded Li by beating him regularly and severely, leaving Li very open to approaches from An Qingxu. At An Qingxu's urging, Li killed An Lushan in 757, just 2 years after he declared himself emperor. So An Qingxu took over as emperor, but it seems he wasn't any better at it than his father, turning out to be a weak leader, lacking the military prowess of his father and proving unable to control his generals. His trusted lieutenant, Shi Siming, betrayed and assassinated An in 759 CE, just 2 years after he became emperor, following in his father's footsteps. Shi Siming took over and was a great and benign emperor beloved by everyone. No, wait, he wasn't. He was an absolute monster. His generals hated him, and eventually, in 761, 2 years after he became emperor, they killed him. Is anyone seeing a pattern here? That didn't end the turmoil instigated by An Lushan's rebellion. In fact, it made things much worse. An Lushan had been a unifying figure who personified the rebellion itself, and in the power vacuum left by his death, the rebellion continued, but with various factions and leaders vying for control and leading to further fragmentation of the once unified empire. The new leaders of the rebellion experienced considerable challenges due to a lack of cohesion and various ambitions, which diverged from the original objectives of An Lushan. The initial motivation for many of the rebels had been a discontent with the central authority of the Tang. However, with An Lushan's death, these motivations began to splinter, developing into a struggle for personal power and territorial control. This fragmentation within rebel ranks, while detrimental in the long run, did not immediately stall the rebellion. In fact, the ensuing years saw the conflict escalate further and take a new shape. For instance, Shi Siming declared himself the ruler of a new state called the Yan dynasty. This signified a shift from rebellion to governance among the rebels, but also indicated a transformation in the nature of the conflict from one of rebellion against oppression to that of a full-scale civil war. With Shi Siming's proclamation of himself as emperor, the political narrative shifted towards a struggle for legitimacy, only tangentially tied to the original grievances against the Tang dynasty. Each subsequent leader attempted to carve out a political niche, resulting in a lack of coordinated effort that eventually became a hallmark of the rebellion's later stages. One of the crucial factors that allowed the An Lushan Rebellion to persist after An Lushan's death was the inherent discontent within the Tang Empire itself. By the time of An Lushan's demise, widespread corruption within the Tang administration, alongside heavy taxation and militarized governance, created fertile ground for rebellion. Many provinces had adopted a semi-autonomous stance, raising local armies, not only in rebellion against the Tang dynasty, but also to protect themselves from the ruthless campaigns of the rebellion. Thus, even with fragmentation, there remained a considerable level of support for the rebellion, as local populations viewed the rebel factions not merely as insurrectionists, but as potential liberators from a dynasty that had increasingly grown detached from their interests. The social fabric of the Tang Empire, which had been woven with threads of diverse ethnicities and cultures, also played a crucial role in prolonging the rebellion. An Lushan had exploited existing ethnic tensions. After his death, these tensions resurfaced, notably as the Tang court attempted to reassert control over various regions. The complexity of allegiances that characterized the rebellion highlighted the precarious nature of ethnic solidarity in the face of evolving leadership conflicts and establishing separate domains of control. What's more, the strategic decisions made by both the Tang court and the rebel leaders further fueled the conflict. The Tang dynasty employed a scorched earth policy in attempts to reclaim territories held by the rebels, yet this only served to deepen resentment and foster sympathy for the rebel cause amongst the local populations, who suffered immensely from the devastation of their lands. This discontent transformed into an ethos of resistance rather than mere support for the rebellion, prolonging the conflict well into the late 760s. The fragmentation of leadership not only heralded fragmentation within the ranks, but also invited external powers to exploit the situation. Local warlords, particularly in the south, began consolidating power and sought to either join the rebels or remain independent of the Tang's control in the chaotic landscape caused by the rebellion. Interests among warlords began to merge, leading to a patchwork of alliances and enmities that would significantly reshape the socio-political landscape of the Tang dynasty. The aftermath of the An Lushan Rebellion, drawing on the rebellion's evolution post-An Lushan himself, bore lingering consequences for the Tang dynasty. The rebellion, ultimately quelled by the Tang court with significant military assistance from foreign allies, left a power vacuum and a devastated landscape across northern China. The conflict had engendered widespread destruction, depopulated regions, and cultivated a climate of fear and instability. Estimates suggest that millions may have died due to combat, famine, and disease. Moreover, the rebellion created lasting changes in administrative practices within the Tang. The costly military campaigns necessitated a re-evaluation of governance, taxation, and military organisation. This shift illustrated the legacy of the rebellion in terms of government and control, a necessity born from the chaos of civil war that would influence subsequent Chinese dynasties, even down to today. Additionally, the ethnic tensions exacerbated during this period impacted the relationships between Han Chinese and various minority groups. The perception of the Tang as an empire gradually shifted, marking a transition from an empire defined by cosmopolitanism to one increasingly wary of regional differences and ethnic identities. The social fabric of Chinese society was forever altered, and the rebellion revealed the vulnerabilities of the Tang state, so much so that the court realized the importance of redefining its governance. The reforms included reducing the powers of military governors and implementing new taxation policies to alleviate the burdens faced by the common populace. These changes aimed to restore central authority and legitimacy in the eyes of the population overwhelmed by the war. But the weakened Tang government struggled to maintain effective governance. Aristocratic families gained more power as the central authority waned, and the rebellion shifted relations between the military and the central government. This shift led to long-lasting changes in governance systems, heightening the reliance on local military powers to maintain control. The social order disintegrated under the rebellion's weight, leading to an era of chaos known as the Five Dynasties and Ten Kingdoms period, during which various factions contended for power. An Lushan's rebellion serves as an example of how personal ambitions combined with broader political context can lead to significant historical change. The events surrounding his life, his death, and the rebellion he instigated reflect the complexities of leadership, loyalty, and betrayal within Imperial China at the time. Ultimately, An Lushan's defection from ally to adversary encapsulated the precarious nature of power, and the aftermath of his assassination not only impacted the immediate political landscape, but also initiated a series of transformations that influenced the governance of China in the future. While no Tang dynasty policies directly shape modern governance, the rebellion's lessons are woven into China's historical pedagogy and political rhetoric. Authorities invoke it to underscore the importance of unity, anti-corruption, and centralized power. Scholarly works and state discourse continue to use it as a benchmark for analyzing state fragility, but its influence is ideological rather than structural. But even today, the rebellion is often cited in discussions of political stability and the consequences of discontent. It serves as a historical lesson on the importance of maintaining authority and addressing grievances. It also highlighted the dangers of military power and regional autonomy, leading to a preference for centralized control in government. Modern Chinese authorities often emphasize the need to maintain strong central leadership to prevent similar uprisings. Generally, the Chinese government places a high priority on social stability, viewing it as essential for national unity and development. This focus can be traced back, in part, to lessons learned from historical events like the An Lushan Rebellion. The rebellion marked a turning point in Chinese history, illustrating the vulnerabilities of the Tang dynasty and foreshadowing its decline. It also highlighted the dangers of relying on powerful regional generals, a theme that would recur in later Chinese dynasties. The Tang dynasty eventually crumbled in 907, around the same time as the Byzantine Emperor Leo XI was fighting the Abbasid army in Cilicia, and a Norseman called Gunnbjorn Ulfsson got lost as he was sailing to Iceland and accidentally discovered Greenland. For the next 70 years, China would again be fragmented, this time into 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, as various warlords and military leaders sought control over different regions. The north saw rapid regime changes among 5 short-lived dynasties, while the south split into 10 regional kingdoms. Political fragmentation and military rivalry defined this era. One of the prominent figures during the final northern dynasty, the later Zhou, was a general named Zhao Guanyin. In 960 CE, troops under his command staged a mutiny and declared him emperor. Zhao accepted and became Emperor Taizu, founding the Song dynasty. Once in power, Emperor Taizu focused on reunifying China. Through a combination of military campaigns and diplomatic efforts, he gradually brought southern kingdoms under Song control. His administration also placed new emphasis on civil governance. Military generals were reassigned or retired, and the civil service examination system became central to selecting officials. This shift from military rule to bureaucratic governance helped stabilise the newly unified realm and marked the beginning of a long and culturally influential dynasty, one that would hold China for over 300 years and see the invention of government-issued paper currency, gunpowder and gunpowder weapons, movable type printing, the first permanent Chinese navy, the first discernment of true north with a compass, and many other scientific and technical advancements, as well as a golden age of cultural and economic prosperity. After prolonged chaos, China once again bounced back into a new golden age.